talk about a house. You cannot be a master in someone else's house. You cannot be a mistress in someone else's home. You must think first of what is it that I need. When you talk about a place for your meeting, we're talking about something that we must own. It may be late for us to own a new one, but God knows, can't we at least own 100 feet by 40 feet of it? We blow more than that on Nike sneakers. Well, am I exaggerating? We're not talking about means, we're talking about priorities. We can't blame what happens on our children because they don't make society. They are a reflection of the adult society. And if we would prefer to spend the extra $50 on another pair of sneakers that we don't need, on a bottle of alcohol that does us no good, on cigarettes or whatever, we wear one shirt at a time, one dress at a time, one pair of pants, one pair of shoes at a time. And in 1865, we didn't have nothing but what we had on, which was rags. And there we stood, little catechism, right among the masters and mistresses that just got through owning us as property. Were they happy about our new situation? Of course not. As far as they were concerned, somebody had taken their property from them unjustifiably. And I want my niggas back, quote. And our ancestors' job was to say, no way, Jose. And they had to do it from scratch. It wasn't even a question of saying, would y'all please maybe give me a couple of pennies here. We didn't have a couple of pennies. And they had to do it all at once. You had to build a family from scratch at once. At the same time when you built a community at once. At the same time when you built a social system at once. An education system all at once. How much help did we get? How much help did we get? None. Certainly we had to depend on ourselves. Now here we stand 137 years later, or we sit. I'm just asking you to think about it. Most of us are at least functionally literate. Most of us can read a map. We have to do that because otherwise we can run in them cars we always run in cars. And yet we are still begging for a place to have our meetings. When you go in the South, where I come from, I grew up, as you know, in a small, rural community, farming community, all black in southeast Georgia. But we had our own little Baptist church there. It wasn't much, but we owned it. No mortgage, lock, stock, and barrel. Yeah, people come and say, hey, look at them simple people. They ain't got no oilcloth in the windows, no pains. But guess what? The building was ours. The ground that it sat on was ours. In that little bit of ground, we could do whatever we wanted to do. And that community, the county said, we have no money for education for niggers. That's a quote. We got educated. How? Because our elders said, you have no money for schools, you take my tax money, and you're not giving any back. Taxation without representation was supposed to be the reason the revolution was fought, right? Okay, we will fight you on that, but in the meantime, our children must be educated. So where do we educate them? In the church. Many times they burnt the churches down. What did we do? What did we do? We built them back. Even our children know this. Many times men stood guard outside of homes and churches all night. and went out in the woods to work and water up to here all day. My grandmother's us in rice field and water up to here. You don't grow rice on no hill. You grow it in water. Can we do any less? No, let me ask some answers. Can we do any less? Should we do any less? No. If every one of us in this room says, I will pledge African Echoes, or whatever your institution is, instead of going or buying that 25-inch TV set next week, or the third VCR, or the fourth car, I will pledge $5 a month. See, I try to be easy on my folks, and we don't like paying. $5 a month for 1 year. How much is that? That's $60 from each adult person. I'm just saying, $60. If you got 1,000 people times 60, how much is that? Is that $60,000 or am I crazy? Last week I lectured for a smart group in Wilmington, Delaware, a very fine group of young people. And when I went to lecture for them the first time, they took me into this building, theirs, which they own. Downstairs, place to eat. Upstairs is the temple where you deal with the material that African people need to be dealt with. They paid $79,000 for this building. They purchased it 3 years ago, I believe, and it's now free and clear there. You know how many active members of this group? 23. How did they do it? The way our ancestors did. Right? The fish fries, the suppers. Y'all hear what I'm saying to you?
Yes.
Yeah, don't get too fancy. Stick with what you know best. Okay. You get dedication, and you get people out there who will do these things, and they pay off this building in 2 years' time. It's not the world's greatest, but it's sitting on a half-acre of land. It's theirs. Their children can come in, they move, they don't have to ask anybody for anything. And they have done a beautiful job. Would you say so, Mr. Pillar?
Yes, sir.
My point simply is this, not to harangue you over the head, but hopefully to ask us to think. Certain survival things we knew, we either have forgotten or we seem to be in a position where we can't wait to forget them. We seem to think that certain simple things are no longer valid, that if it can't be grandiose, or if it can't be something where you can get a gale of something coming on, that it's not worthwhile. But what it takes is dedication and a commitment to having something our own. Because those people built the communities of which we are the recipients. We're not saying they built perfectly, but they built better than what they found. We've got colleges that our people run. You should be proud of that. All the colleges and universities that we control are all in the South. Why is that? There are historical reasons for these things. We must understand that. We need to look at it. Why is that? Because that was the only place we were able to get a toehold, to get a place to stand. When we came into Newark, or I say up south, or New York, or Philadelphia, or Boston, we came into areas, cities, that had already been staked out by claims of various European ethnic groups. When we came here from the South and the Caribbean, we didn't even know any, if you said ethnic group, we didn't know what the hell you were talking about. A balanced political ticket meant nothing. Because where we came from, we dealt with one kind of European, usually Anglo-Saxon crackers. Or maybe in some cases some Frenchmen, which is another side of the same thing, or some Spaniards. But fundamentally the same thing. You know, you gotta have one, if you have the balanced ticket, you gotta have the Italian for mayor, and you gotta have a Jew for controller, and you must have a Greek in charge of things. That never happened. So here you came into a situation where each subgrouping had staked out a certain part of their territory. Those of you who live in this city know what a long time it took to get a piece of the action. And by the time you got your first mayor, I think his name was Kenneth Gibson, if my memory doesn't serve me, the last ethnic group who had come into power, the Italians, had cleaned everything out. Am I lying or not? So you went into City Hall and found that it was empty. And then everybody turned around and broke all 5,000 fingers off pointing at you and said, y'all done it. And too many of us say, yeah, well, we must have done it. New York, same thing. So, and part, and you say it may be away from what I'm talking about, it's not. All of these things tie up. Religion has played a very important part in the conditioning of us and the process of our thinking. I've done, those of you who were here for the other two lectures, certainly was able to follow. If you were not, Brother Yusuf, Brother Pitter did make a certain attempt. I gave you, in those two lectures, I think about 8 hours of historical background, etc., etc. I was asked by Ms. Haynes and others today, let's now look at how this concept, this legacy, is affecting us. I have nothing against religion per se, because all human beings need to have a concept of something greater than they are. I would never stand up and say to you, there is no God. I'm not stupid. Among many sins, that ain't one of them. Blanche Mackey had 13 children. Or we raised 13. And we a whole lot of things, but ain't none of us stupid. Right? We can all think. So when I walk and I ride, or you fly over this world, and you see all of this awesome creativity out here, common sense got to tell you it didn't create itself. That's not the argument. There's got to be some force out there that is greater than the sum of all of its parts. The question that we have to deal with, which I'm focusing on tonight, is whether or not that force is a malevolent force, a benevolent force, or a neutral force. Is that clear what I'm saying? Yeah. That's the issue. Thank you, son. You know, I used to do that when I was a little boy like you, and the folks used to say, that boy gonna be a prophet. I think he'll be a prophet too. Anything you want to be. That's right. Now, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because somewhere along the line, with the pragmatic desires of certain people of power, religion, as it has been for so long, has become a means of enslaving or exploiting or destroying people. One does not have to have a religion to believe in a supreme being. Is that clear?
Yes.
You don't ever have to go inside a temple of worship. The question of what we owe the supreme being are questions that we can argue back and forth from here to eternity. But what should concern all of us in here as African people, never mind them hyphenated non-entities, we're African. It takes too long to say African dash this or stroke this or that or the other. I never hear them folks call themselves Anglo-Americans or French or Franco-Americans. They just American. First of all, I don't consider the term American as a positive one in the first damn place. That we need to examine definitions and how they apply to us by others. You need to define what you want to call yourself. You can call yourself Sammy Jones, but the decision should be ours, not inherited from somebody else. So that what we're saying, what we want to look at is how these concepts of religion, particularly Christianity, particularly Islam, And I use these two, particularly Judaism, because for no other reason that these are the three religions which have affected African people that have impacted on us the most. Anybody disagree with that? So therefore, when you go from the belief in a supreme being to the concept of the ritual of how one worships or should one worship, and what one owes the Creator or does not owe the Creator, or how one should go about paying off what one owes the Creator, that is where the problem comes. Is that clear? Yeah. It's like this beautiful lady who done me the honor, my lady, Miss Green, says to me, in her home, where she grew up, there was only one book in the house. That was the Bible. They didn't have libraries. And they were a rather large family, not quite large. The only book she ever saw her mother reading was what? The Bible. The only book she ever saw her father reading was what? The Bible. And this has been the inheritance, I would argue, thank you, for most of us in this room. Even where we were not hit across the head with it, it was there. We constantly heard reference to it. The Bible, the good book, the St. James Version, or if they were a little sophisticated, the Authorized Version. So it became inculcated into us and was hammered home in us that this book is the truth. This is the book. Ask anybody who says, yes, I believe in the Bible. When you ask the next question then, what is the Bible? Most of us can't tell you. What does the word mean? Most of us can't tell you. We speak of Genesis, Exodus. Most of our folks don't even know that various other groups who look at that Bible as some kind of pinnacle only deal with parts of it. If you mention the New Testament to a devout Jew, you know what he'll say to you? I don't know about that. It means nothing to me. The devout Jew is concerned with how many of those books of the 66? 5, which they refer to as the Pentateuch, or the 5 books of Moses. Anything that comes after that has nothing to do with Hebrew ritual. Speak to a Muslim, and he or she will say, what do you mean Jesus? I accept Jesus as being one of the prophets. But don't tell me about this godhood of Jesus. He was a man that walked just like anybody else. We consider him a prophet the same as Eli, Moses, Eckhart, because you share all parts of these things. When we go back and look at the religion of ancient Babylonia, what they call the Mesopotamia, or the land between the rivers, which is of course Iraq and these countries still fighting over today, we look at what the Hebrews call the 10 basic commandments, which according to them, their liturgy or ritual was brought down from Mount Sinai by who? Moses. And then I go and I study history. And as a little boy, in that little backwoods Black Baptist church, and I don't knock it, to this day it's part of my culture, my heritage. We have to learn to separate the two. And I can remember us sitting up there saying, what's the shortest verse in the Bible? Jesus wept. See, I'm 73 years old. And immediately if you ask me, Professor Mackey, what's the shortest verse? Jesus wept. I don't have to think about that. And why I don't have to think about it, because when I was no larger than this child here, sitting in catechism, the Sunday school teacher got up and literally, by rhythm, banged this into our subconsciousness. I learned the 10 Commandments the same way I learned all the tables from 1 to 12. That is the multiplication table. Now, if you grew up in the South, in the period I did, say in the 20s and 30s, and you had the intelligence of a low-grade moron, and somebody would ask you to recite the multiplication tables, oh man, you would go, 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 4 is 8, 2 times 5 is 10. And we sing this every day, the last day of class. We'd sing. The teacher would say, do the 6-time table, or do the 12-time. Now, if you would ask one of us to do the 13-time table, we had a big problem. Okay? Yeah. Because nobody, if you look at the back of those arithmetic books, they only went up to the 12-time table. 12 times 12 is 144. Over and out, slam, bam, thank you, ma'am. Good night. Was that learning? Was it learning? No. It's rote.
That's right.
Because learning would have meant to understand, okay, these are the basic tools. Numerology, these are abstract numbers. In order to have meaning, you must combine them and learn certain other way. And in that, you put in part of this process in there. Your thinking process. To go by rote and say 12 times 12 is 144. 13 times 12. Oh yeah, 13. Now let's see now. 12 times 12 is 144. 13 times 12. There ain't no such number as 13 times 12. Now, if you can understand that, a little bit of it, you can understand exactly how we get programmed for anything else, whether it be the 10 Commandments, or whether it be the verses of the Bible. Thou shalt not steal. The teacher that taught me that in Sunday school later went out and swindled his cousin out of 50 acres of prime Georgia land. Because the old man got a stroke and couldn't think, and he got him to sign this thing off. He went west. And when I said to him, Cousin Joe, how come you teach thou shalt not steal? And went, boy, prayer's all right in prayer meeting, but it ain't worth a damn in bed meeting. The contradictions. We can apply this kind of logic when we talk about numerology. But anytime we get caught up in this thing about religion or Christianity, if I were to ask most people in this room, how many working religions are there today? Unless you happen, I don't expect an answer, but unless you happen to be a theologian or interested, I would argue that most people in this room can't even name 10. And I don't want to embarrass you because probably whoever could name 10 is one of the children. But yet we will say, I'm a Christian. What is a Christian? By definition, somebody who believes in Christianity. What is Christianity? If you finally back people up into a corner with logic, they will tell you, well, I don't know what it is, but I takes it on faith. That may be a statement, but it ain't an answer. You know, I might wish that when I finish this lecture tonight, that I close my eyes and I can believe strong. If I close my eyes and have enough faith, when I open my eyes, I'll be sitting in my bedroom in Brooklyn. Right? But if Brother Yusuf or somebody, some kind of man don't get me there, I'll end up here all night like this until they won't open school tomorrow. So part of it takes advantage of the desire that people have to be on the side of angels. Most people say, well, even it don't cost me nothing to believe. And if I die and there ain't no heaven, but since I believe in Christianity, it didn't take nothing from me. On the other hand, if I say there ain't no heaven and no hell, and I die and there is a heaven, and I end up burning up in hell. Well, children, the problem with that is, if I ask everybody in this room, every adult in this room, to define what hell means for them, I would argue most of y'all would come up with a different answer. When you're hungry, you ain't got nothing to eat, don't know where the next meal is coming from, huh? Cold outside and you ain't got no soles in the bottom of your shoes. What is that? Did you die to get there? Hell no. If that's not a redundancy. Right? Right? You in love with this woman or this man. And you wait each week, I think this person, this is my life. And I love this person, I must have her, him, / stroke, whatever. They. But he, she likes George Jeanette. And you're saying and you're praying every night, God, please make her love me. Because I love her, and I can't live without her. And then she gets pain. And every time I see that dude and the way she looks at him, make her look at me that way. Otherwise, I'm going to die because I was in misery. What does it change, y'all? Huh? Nothing. But there's a lot of wish fulfillment which is involved. Now, again, I'm not knocking this out because I know that human beings, most of us need a reason to get up in the morning because that's a part of our humanity. When we are downtrodden, when we have burgled, when we are hungry, or abused, or oppressed, we look for something that will help get us through the day. One of the ironies in our situation here as Africans, within the context of the Judeo-Christian body of beliefs, those 5 books of Moses, that Old Testament in total, if you will, happen to, just by coincidence, fit with the condition of the Africans in captivity. Y'all follow the fit, right? So we couldn't read, we were forbidden to read, forbidden to have anything, and somebody, I don't know who, but they latched onto this Bible, and they saw something about the Hebrew children, and etc., and they said, that's for me. I don't knock it. We shouldn't knock it because it was all they had. Something to hold on to. If they hadn't had something, we wouldn't be here. Or certainly not in the form that we're in. But they grabbed on to this because they could see parallels between what happened to them and what happened to the Israelites. But again, when you add racism, that puts another complication, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And that complication comes because the Christianity that we got from these people as it was sifted through to us, when it was finally put through to us, was done in such a manner as to wed us to the conditions of eternal inferiority or subjugation. And not only being there eternally, but deservedly so, while the people that oppressed us deserved their position of a higher state because they deserved it. And many of us to this day still have this concept because what it ultimately leads to, in the end of frustration, one becomes full of self-hatred, or what we call the legacy of the slave mentality. Once the powers that be saw that concept of how it could be used, what was filtered down through us to us was distorted to begin with. We were permitted only to get that part, or focus on that part of the Bible and the teaching of the Bible that the ruling class, the master class, felt did not threaten it and helped to bind us more closely to him. In other words, let me just run that down by you, because I don't want to get too highfalutin here. You know, one of these things that we scholars have a nasty habit, we get carried away and start using linguistics that sometimes we don't understand, but it sounds important. Let me lay out what you're saying. One of the things I constantly stress to put these things in perspective, and I would like you to remember, is a large part of what happens to us doesn't have to do with us being inferior or being demons, etc. It has to do with accidents of history. certain things just happening to happen at a certain time. For example, Columbus stumbling over San Salvador in 1492 and went to his grave pretending he thought he was in India. Now, that didn't change the destiny of the indigenous people here, did it? Because whether he stumbled over them or had deliberately, quote-unquote, discovered them, didn't they pay the hell for what he did? It still cost them their land, didn't it? And more often their lives. But yet, the fact itself was one of those large accidents of history. In 1488, a gentleman by the name of Sebastian del Cano, C-A-N-O, happened to be on a ship going around the southern coast of the motherland, or down toward the southern coast. And up until that time, Europeans had believed that once you got down about where is the latter part of Africa, that the earth dropped off. As these smart people who were smart, as the earth dropped off, and there was all them green monsters out there. And if you went out there, the ship just could kabloom, and you went down into an abyss. And Del Cano out there doing some trade got caught in a storm and lost control. And they all said their prayers, their Hail Mary, full of grace, the bullfrog pissed in the monkey's face and all that kind of stuff. Because they just knew it was all over. But when the storm cleared, Mr. Del Cano and his crews, the ones that survived, found themselves looking at our motherland for the first time that anybody in history of Europeans looking at the motherland, looking at the eastern shore of Africa from what they later called the Indian Ocean. Now, Del Cano didn't navigate around there. Say that again? The storm blew him around there. If he had never left Portugal, the storm would have still done what it did, right? But when he looked around and says, aha, I have discovered the east coast of Africa. The Africans always knew it was there. Huh? The Africans had been trading with Asia across what they later called the Indian Ocean, the caravan trade, since time immemorial. But to the Europeans now, it's a big discovery, and guess what? Everything I sees, I owns. I claims it all. And anybody who lives here belongs to me. And along with this, the Africans and others, not knowing very much of what was happening in Europe, knowing all about this upheaval going on. There were all kinds of things happening. Most of it bad, just like most things happening in Europe today is bad. You don't believe it? Read your daily headlines of the day. Bosnia, this place, that place, right? The pound sterling gonna kick your butt, that butt, you know. We can't go into this place and that place. Well, they've been doing that for the last 5,000 years. But in any event, this was one of those periods of upheaval. Let's look at it. This is a time of the Inquisition, time of the so-called Protestant Reformation, where people were beginning to challenge authority, ecclesiastical authority, based on the divine right of kings, kings being subordinate to the emperor, who was subordinate to the holy pope that sat on the throne in Rome. Did the Africans know anything about this? Of course, certainly not in the eastern coast of Africa. Did they know that their lives were going to be affected by this? No. And here in Spain, you had people being burned for their own good. And auto da fe. To prove that you are faithful, we will burn you. And if you burn all the way up, that proves that you're faithful. Yeah, these are superior Europeans. At the same time in England, they were running by some kind of laws called the law of compurgation. If some lady accused you of raping her, she went and got her brother to meet with you and do a fight, do a duel to the death. If the brother won, you were guilty. If you won, she lied. See, so Tawana Brawley, it wasn't something new they invented. Wherever you go, you carry your cultural baggage with you. If you were accused of murder, did you do it? No, I did not do it. Okay? Take a 5-pound piece of hot iron, red hot iron, hold it in your right, I ain't making this up, hold it in your right hand. See, that's what history will do for a lot of this entry, you know. Hold it in your right hand and walk from here to the back of the door and back and drop it. And we will look at your hand 5 days from now. And if your hand 5 days from now looks just like it looks now, that means you're innocent. If it's blistered or burnt, that means you're guilty and your behind is gone. This was the mentality of these people. And therefore, their religious concepts were militant concepts. They did not see, quote, the supreme being, or you say God, as a benevolent entity. Their God would take one of them thunderbolts and knock you into West Hell. Bam! In a minute. Don't mess with me, man. The Lord thy God is a jealous God, and I'll kick your butt. Don't come talking to me about no compassion. You want compassion? Do what I tell you to do now. And as I said before, that was the difference between my grandmother's God and my grandfather's God. My grandfather's God was always threatening. If you don't do this, God's going to strike you down. I'm so most of it, you all come from the same culture. If you don't behave yourself, God going to do. I said, man, this dude is tough, you know, I mean. But my grandma's God was always compassionate. She would always be talking to him about looking over her children, West all grandchildren. My grandma, at that time, she must have had about 45 grandchildren. And she would stay, she knew all our names, you know. And she would go by every one of them grandchildren's name and ask the Supreme Being to bless and look over by name. And I had to be kneeling down on my bed next to her. And I said, Lord, when is Grandma going to get through with this list, you know? It sounded like them beget chapters in the Bible. John begat, and he begat, and she begat, and whatnot. And this ritual would take about an hour every night. You know?
Hold on, 1 second. Anybody outside, anybody here that has a blue Toyota?
But she was always compassionate. Now, what this does to us, it gives us a kind of a dichotomy about the Supreme Being. There's this yin and the yang. One side is the one that slaps you down, and the other is like the two bosses in one. One boss tells you what a wonderful job you're doing, but the other boss said, we don't have no money to give you a raise. You know, so you're caught in this, out there in this dilemma. Now, this is the kind of turmoil that these Europeans are going through at this time. And as I said, one of the big weapons they used was the Bible. Everybody made their interpretation on the Bible. You had the Lutheranism. Martin Luther, 1517, nailing up his 95 Theses to the church door at Worms, in which he accuses them of doing everything. You're spending money, you're paying off God for indulgences and all these other kind of things. A few years later, Jean Calvin as we know him, who's the father of what you today would call Congregationalism, or them same folks over there that's harassing our people in Africa, them Dutch Reform folks. They're Calvin people, don't forget that. And they did it to us in the name of who? God and religion. Now, you're watching all of this going on. And very quickly, as they begin to move out and take advantage of the naivete and hospitality of other non-European people, early on, the Bible quickly and really Christianity became a part of that, because it was a part of their struggle and rationale for what they were leaving in Europe. We need to understand this. The Calvinist doctrine said this, and bear in mind this very well, because this is a very important part of why we're here in our concept. The Calvinist doctrine said, and I quote, put simply, whatever position that a human being occupied on this earth, he or she was in that position because God ordained it. Is that clear, y'all? In other words, if you were a banker, a rich banker, and you own half the money in Newark, you had that money because God willed you to have it. If you were a slave, you were a slave because God wanted you to be a slave. Ain't that neat? This is not me. This is the doctrine. Any position that any human being found himself or herself in was there because it was what they call, the concept is called predestination or preordination. It was preordained by God. Therefore, since one ought to serve God, whatever position that a human being found himself or herself in, they had no right or no reason to protest it. They should accept it cheerfully, happily, in the truth that if they were the best slave they knew how to be, when they died, guess what happened, y'all? They would get their reward in heaven. You go up there, and God would say, you was a good slave down yonder here. Here's the brush, go polish the stars. And here's a cup here, here's this silver goblet. You can drink yourself some ambrosia. You can sweep down the stars, and you can sing all the hymns and hallelujah and all the rest, and you do this forever and ever and ever. Man, what a monotony, what a boring thing this is to me. Now, there's a story I'd like to tell you about this. Now, don't get upset with me, but if you get upset, I have to tell you the truth, I don't care. One of my uncles, who was considered sacrilegious down home because he was the only one that would walk by the church on pastoral day, and he was a great blues guitarist, and he would sit out on a bench between two trees across from the church, and he would play the most raucous blues. He could sing like, "My woman mean and evil, and she howls just like the wind," as loud as he could. And my grandma said, "Boy, go out there and tell Benjamin to shut that mess off out there in front of God's house." And he stopped for a little while, but he walked out the street, he'd come back, and he'd hit another one of them hard ronking blues notes, And man, that dude could really play. A lot of folks want to say, he had a contest whether I'm going to listen to these gorgeous hymns or gospel coming out here or go hear them blues. And a lot of times blues won. But he told this story, and I asked him once, I said, "Why don't you go to church?" Because I think God's going to strike that man down any minute, because people say he ain't going to have no good luck. One of these days, God's going to strike him down. And we believe this. And I kept wondering, when was God going to strike Uncle Benjamin down? Uncle Benny, as we call him. So one day when I got about 16, I got enough courage to ask him. We were sitting on a log out in the woods, and I said, "Uncle Ben, how come you just talk like that and you just blaspheme?" He said, "Boy, I don't blaspheme. I don't go that far." I said, "But you ain't going to heaven." And he says, "I don't want to go to heaven." And my mouth went slack. "How could you not want to go to heaven?" And he says, "All my friends, people I like, they're going to be down in hell playing the blues." And I want to be with my friends. He says, "I ain't got no business up there singing. I can't sing no hymns. I can't raise the first hymn." And he was serious. So when I told another minister about it, because it upset me, he said, "Boy, let me tell you a story." He said, "Once there was a man that was a good man, and all his life he strove to do the right thing. Served God, went to church, did all he could do by his neighbors. And when he died, he went up by Father Abraham and St. Peter, looked at the list and says, 'George, you done good, kid. Come on in. Get your reward.' So the dude goes in, and they give him the broom and the plow and the dustpan, and they tell him, 'Now you go over there and you sweep down the stars, you polish them stars over in the North 40. Says, "How many of them are there?" "I think about 20 million. After you get through, come back and let me know, and we send you down the South 40. So he went out there. That took him like about 2/4 of an eternity, and he comes back, and man is just running around. He see all this thing about milk and honey. He hadn't seen none of it. All he saw was working and pricking all the dust and the lice out of the wings and all them kind of things. So one day he's sitting down talking to St. Peter, and he looked down in hell, and he saw a guy that was the worst reprobate in the community back on earth. And this dude was sitting down, nude, and he had this beautiful brown sister sitting there, and she was also nude. Fantastic figure. And in his hand, he had a fifth of Chivas Regal. And he had this big beatific smile on his face. So George looks at it and says, man, what the hell is going on down here? It's just stuff. See, here I've been all my life, and I've been a good person, a good Christian, and all the rest of this, and work hard. You got me up here, polished and starting what now? And I look down there and look at that dude. Man, I knew that dude. He was a reprobate, a hellraiser, never been nothing, did everything he could, messed with everybody's wife, never took care of his children. There he is down in hell having a good time. So St. Peter said, hey, hold it, wait a minute, don't blow a gasket. He said, you see that bottle of Chivas Regal he's got there in his hand? He says, yeah. He said, well, that bottle got a hole in the bottom. So now you see that beautiful lady that's sitting on his right knee? He says, yeah. He said, well, she ain't. So there he sat. Couldn't drink, and he's got a beautiful woman, and there's nothing he can do. So as far as St. Peter was concerned, this dude's hell was having what he wanted to have on earth. But he didn't have no way of consummating it. And a lot of times, this is what happens to us, and you don't have to die for that. Now, when you looked at, and this is how close these things were, when you looked at the Calvinists, and this religion developed at the same time as African slavery, watch how these two accidents of history dovetail. One of the first things that our ancestors, was they attempted to drum into our ancestors was, you are a slave because who made you a slave? God made you a slave. And if you want to please God, you must be the best slave you can. Servant, obey your master. Now you can see that right away here we have biblical literature dovetailing with economic desire. Now imagine that you want to be a Christian and you're a slave and you want to be, quote, a good Christian, the best Christian you can be. Don't you have a problem? Right? Because you say, well now how can I be a good Christian? That is why in the beginning, when it was determined that we will allow the Africans to have some religion, always provided in the beginning that the teacher and the preacher be white, or later on when a slave preacher was put up, like I'm talking here, the white person had to sit there to become an overseer. Therefore, anything that you said would be put down. Now, you say to me, Professor Mackey, how do you know this? Let me bore you, hope not too unduly. This is from a book, Great Issues in American History. And this is a full volume set. You might, if you can find it around, it's rare, but you can find it somewhere. This is volume 1 from 1584 to 1776, edited by Clarence L. Versteeg and Richard Hofstadter. That's Hofstadter. And I'd like to call your attention to a sermon preached, and this is a document, actual sermon, from the chapter part 4, The Politics of Internal Controversy. Document 12. Now, I don't know, some of you may be familiar with this, and I do beg your indulgence if you are. Thomas Bacon, the Reverend Thomas Bacon's sermon to Negro slaves, 1743. The foreword, the authors say, the impact of black slavery on American colonial life was pervasive. But as a factor in politics, the slave was usually outside of specific political discussion. The role of the slave was assumed but unstated. The slaves, who of course had no political spokesman, were barred from the traditional American expectations of a better life, of progress, of working to improve one's status, with the result that the slave was alienated from the mainstream of American life. As I said, servant, obey your master. In the following document, a sermon preached by a Maryland minister, Reverend Thomas Bacon, to a group of slaves, reveals the white man's view of the slave's political and social role and argues for a docile, obedient servant who willingly accepts all earthly burdens. And this I'm reading to you because it is typical of the kind of conditioning that was attempted on us. The miracle is that we've done as well as we've done, children. And here's what he starts his sermon. Knowing that whatever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be slave or free. That's the white minister talking. My well-beloved black brethren and sisters. They're his brothers and sisters, but he's free and they're slaves. When you were last here, I endeavored to show you that God made you and all the world, and that he made you and all mankind to serve him. That it is he who places every man in the station or rank which he holds in the world, making some kings, some masters and mistresses, some tradesmen and working people, and others servants and slaves. You, God has chosen to be slaves. That every one of us is obliged to do the business God has set us about in that state or condition of life to which he has been pleased to call us. And that whoever is doing his business quietly and honestly in the world and living as a Christian ought to do is serving of God, though his condition be ever so low and mean, and will be as much taken notice of and as highly favored by God on that last great judgment day. Not before. Just as the greatest prince on earth, for God is no respecter of persons. Then you might ask them, well, how come I'm a slave? I also laid before you that you ought to serve God for your own sakes, because you have souls to be saved. And if you should lose them, you are undone forever. So you see, my joke wasn't really that far out away from reality. That everyone who dies and goes into another world must go either to heaven or to hell. And that there is no other way of escaping everlasting punishment in hell or being eternally happy in heaven but by serving God while he spares our life upon earth. I then went on to show you what duty you owe to God in particular, that you are to look upon him as your great and chief master, to whom you must one day answer for everything you have done in this life. That he is always looking upon you and taking notice of your behavior, so that if you could deceive all the world, you cannot deceive God. That you are to love God above all things, or else he will not love you, which would be the most dreadful thing that could happen to you. That if you love God sincerely, you will be afraid of doing anything that is bad, because his Holy Spirit is grieved to see men destroy their souls by their wickedness. That if the love of God is not strong enough to keep you from doing what is bad, and vexing and offending him thereby, you ought at least to dread his terrible judgments, for that he is able not only to destroy your bodies and strike you dead in a moment, but also to cast both body and soul into hell, which will certainly be the portion of all such as provoke him to anger by leading wicked lives. That you are to worship God both in public and in private. In public by coming to church as often as you have leave and opportunity, and in private by praying to him for everything you want and giving him thanks for all his goodness to you, which you may easily do when you are walking or working in the house or in the field. That, you picked that up, huh? That you ought to reverence and honor Almighty God, and keep from all cursing and swearing, or making any light, foolish, vain use of his great and holy name, and that you must keep from all lying, because God hates all such as tell lies, and will give them over to the devil, who is the father of all lies and liars. Y'all didn't know that. In the next place, I endeavored to show you how you ought to behave toward your masters and mistresses. We come to the crux now. And to make it plain to you that as God himself has set them over you here, in the nature of his stewards and overseers, he expects you will do everything for them as you do for God himself. Today we would call this a prime snow job. You're with it, right? That you must be obedient and subject to them in all things, and do whatever they order you to do, unless it should be some wicked thing which you know God has forbidden, in which case you are to refuse, but in order. That you must not be eye servants, that is, such as will be very busy in their master's presence, but very idle when their backs are turned. For your headmaster, and you know who that is, right? Almighty God is looking on you, and though you may escape being found out or punished by your owners for it, yet you cannot deceive God, who will punish you severely in the next world for your deceitful dealings in this one. That you must be faithful and honest to your masters and mistresses, not wasting their substance. Don't eat too much. Or letting anything belonging to them perish for want of your care, because that is next to stealing. For the master's loss is the same as if he had been robbed of it. If you think I'm making it up, anybody come and check this book after I finish. And that you are to serve your owners with cheerfulness, respect, and humility, not grumbling or giving any sassy answers, but doing your work with readiness, mildness, and good nature, because your sassiness and grumbling is not so much against your owners as it is against God himself, who has placed you in that service, and expects you will do the business of it as he has commanded you. Now, to suit this rule to your particular circumstances, suppose you were masters and mistresses and had servants under you. Would you not desire that your servants should do their business faithfully and honestly, as well when your back was turned as while you were looking over them? Would you not expect that they should take notice of what you said to them? That they should behave themselves with respect toward you and yours, and be as careful of everything belonging to you as you would be to yourselves? You are servants. Do therefore as you would wish to be done by, and you will both be good servants to your masters, and at the same time good servants to God, who requires this of you, and will reward you well for it, if you do it for the sake of conscience and obedience to his command. Again, suppose that you were people of some substance, and had something of your own in the world. Would you not desire to keep what you had, and that nobody should take it from you without your own consent, or hurt anything belonging to you? If then you love your neighbor as yourself, or would do by others as you could wish they would do by you, you will learn to be honest and just toward all mankind, as well as to your masters and mistresses, and not steal or take away anything from anyone without his knowledge or consent. You will be as careful not to hurt anything belonging to your master, or do any harm to his goods, his cattle, or his plantation, or to see it done by others as you would be to be hurt yourself, or anything you have of your own, and will behave yourselves toward all mankind and your owners with the same honesty and goodwill as you could wish they would do for you in a like case. Your fellow servants are more particularly to be looked upon as your brethren. Your common station as slaves, your complexion, and your marriages one among another in different families make you nearer to each other than in all the rest of the world except your owners. And poor and ignorant as you are, you may do much good and prevent much harm by behaving one toward another as brothers and sisters ought to do, and as God requires of you. And considering all things, you must be miserable creatures indeed, if you will not be loving and affectionate, kind and honest among yourselves. But for fear you should mistake my meaning, I will first describe to you what true love and affection is, and then endeavor to show you in particular how you ought to behave one toward another. If any of you have been wicked creatures, idle, drunken, swearing, thievish, lewd people, and being at length overtaken by the hand of God and laid down on a painful sick bed without any hope of recovery, with all the terrors of conscience about you, and nothing before you but death, and the fearful apprehensions of being miserable forever, what a dread. dreadful state of mind you would then be in. And what would you then give that you had been blessed with a true friend in your former days, one that had so much real love for you as to have warned you of your danger and have hindered you by his kind advice from running such lengths of wickedness as you had done? And would you not then think such a friend would have been one more value to you than the whole world? You have it in your power to be such true friends and lovers to one another and to your masters above all. And though you can give but little bodily help, you can do what is far better. You can help each other on your masters. If you see any of your fellows taking something from your masters, it is your duty, and God desires it of you, to inform your masters of this. You can, by a good example, prevent a great deal of wickedness and indecency in your meeting and conversation one among another. And where you find that your sober, friendly advice will do no good, you may terrify your companion from doing bad things by threatening to tell on them. And by such means as these, as you may help to save their soul and get a blessing upon yourselves and your families. But, oh my brethren, I am grieved to say it, you are so far from doing this that I fear many of you rather encourage and help one another in wickedness and go hand in hand toward destruction rather than strive to assist and obey your masters on the way to heaven. Thank you. Now, I took the time to read that to you at length because, as I said, this kind of material is very hard to come by. As Dr. Clark always calls me the mole. If it's out there, I'll usually find it. But I think it has value for us to be able to understand clearly the direct methods which had been used to program our minds into a certain frame of reference, where you're telling people that good is bad and bad is good. Your first duty is to your masters, not your brother. The fact that these people enslaved you and took your body and kidnapped you has nothing to do with it. That is not dealt with. The whole concept of how it has been used to us. Here, for example, is this book on the devil. And it's interesting, by Jeffrey Burton Russell, Perception of Evil from Antiquity to Primitive Christianity. And this shows you how. And I take the time for these examples. I think they're important because it is just these kind of techniques that are used to condition not only our mind, but our children today.
That's right.
And this is what we have to do. TV and these things, I'll give you examples when I finish reading this, of how you plant the seed. Like I said to you, Jesus wept. What is God? God is love. All of these things, honor thy father and thy mother, that days may be long upon the earth, which the Lord thy God giveth thee. And you said 10 commandments. And where did they come from? The Old Testament. But if I go back and get you the Babylonian digography and the Code of Hammurabi, what do we find? We find the same commandments, except instead of 10, there were 20 of them. And the way they were put, what the Hebrew translation did, it turned them around and put them in the negative sense. Honor thy father and thy mother. The way that was done in the Code of Hammurabi, he who honoreth not his father and mother will not see many days upon the earth. Hammurabi, who was a great leader of Babylon and Assyria, which is now where Iraq is, the same land is right there where it's been all this time. It ain't going nowhere. They didn't hook no barge onto it with a cable and pull it off somewhere else. The same people or culture are still there. Now we know that. I ask those of you who may be interested, because we can't do it all, to go check. If you look at the Code of Hammurabi and you see another one, he says, I have not done a disservice to my neighbor by lusting after his wife today? You know the parallel in the Ten Commandments. Rephrased different, is the sense the same? Of course it is. So you say to me, well, Professor Mackey, what does that have to do with it? Very simple. The code of Hammurabi, the king or emperor, predates the Hebrew Old Testament by some 12 to 15,000 years, long before the Babylonian captivity. Now, when I mention Babylonian captivity, that's supposed to, oh, right? Hammurabi, Babylon. Now, certainly there are certain things in the Bible that deal with there. You know, Nineveh, where was Nineveh? Same place. Assyria, same place. We know from the Hebrew children in the fiery furnace, where all these events that supposed to took place right in this area now, where these people here are busy trying to bomb them off the face of the earth. All of a sudden, the Iraqis have now become demons, and Saddam Hussein is the chief demon of them all. And therefore, once you demonize somebody, it's quite all right to kill them. The problem I'd like to say to my brothers and sisters in here, you see, whenever they don't have no immediate exciting demons to demonize, we are the standby demons. Is that clear? Huh? Is that clear? I want y'all to understand this clearly. Yeah. We are the demons of record. Whenever they don't have no more exciting demons, I say, okay, let's get back on them. If any of y'all saw last week any of the testimony from New York's finest, where this guy who calls himself, he said they nicknamed him the mechanic, and he don't know the first thing about repairing cars. And they said, well, why did they call you mechanic? He says, I was good at tuning people up. Said, what do you mean tuning them up? I was an expert at beating them up. Who did you beat up mostly? Blacks, Latinos, or women and children if I wanted to. Put lead-lined sand on the outside glove. It was like hitting somebody with a thing of quarters in your hand. Didn't do any damage to you. And they said, well, why did you do? Well, these are criminals. No, we beat up on anybody. Why did you do it? And what was his answer? To let them know who was boss. Now take that and stretch it to all of us, because that kernel really describes succinctly and honestly and dramatically our situation. In other words, they don't have to have done anything. They are there, and they are there for my convenience, whether it be Rodney King, who got hell beat out of him because them Jerry curls, God didn't recognize. Now, there are all kind of lessons there for us, Yeah, this business of imitating the dude that's trying to ice you, something sick about that, but hey, that's not this lecture. But I had to mention that in passing. And the judge that sentenced these two guys to federal prison, where they ain't going nowhere, said, what? Whose fault was it? Rodney King. He brought it on himself. Why? Well, he had a weapon. What weapon? His body was his weapon. He tried to ward off the blows, and I felt my life was threatened. Now, if it takes any great imagination from you to get from the individual Rodney King to the rest of us, then you're in the wrong lecture on the wrong day. Go home. Because I have nothing of value to say to you. But when it comes from the horse's mouth, and when this other cop said, and one of the commission members said to him, well, weren't you afraid at any time y'all stealing and selling this dope? Weren't you afraid of getting caught? Now, I ain't telling y'all nothing that the African community already know. Weren't you afraid of getting caught? And the cop said, I beg your pardon? Like he didn't hear him. He said, well, I mean, you're out there stealing and selling. Weren't you afraid of getting caught? And the guy says, who's going to catch us? We the police. I'm walking direct. Catch who? Who's going to do the catch? We the police. And we're doing the stealing. And all in watch the commitment, because this is important. Here these guys admitting to, ain't nobody got no gun. They admitting to all kind of things, and I did this, and I was taken in. At one time, I got $14,000. Now, I ain't telling y'all nothing that nobody's African don't know. But when we say this, we're lying. How much was you making? $4,000. Now, you say, what's the connection? Well, all them folks are good Catholic people. They're all good Christians.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Believe in God, go to Mass every morning before they go to work. Say 15 Hail Marys.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
Yeah, before they go down to tune up one of us.
Yeah.
And see, and wears, them crosses. Do they have do they see any contradiction between beating up one another? No. Not at all. Because you ain't human, you've been demonized. And here's the guy sitting, and it's, what about the superiors? Well, what about them? Well, no, we weren't bothered about them. All they said was, they teach us in the academy. Have an answer. All I want you to know is have an answer for me. He didn't say, give me the truth, have an answer. In other words, give me an answer that I can go to place and that's what it is. So that's what we did, give an answer. Nobody, no. When you afraid you're for, no, our cops are good cops. Good cops, yeah, they don't rat on nobody. And you got one cop after cop coming testifying this, and here are the newscasters, and including them two sisters that got them smiles painted on it. Sue Simmons and the other lady. What's her name? Huh? Yeah. Well, now we want to emphasize here. We're not talking about the whole New York City Police Department. We are just speaking about there's teeny-weeny rotten apples, because the majority of these cops are honest and do a job. And I sit and I say, either y'all professors dumb, or they think we're dumb. Because I said, now here are people who just testified that they didn't have to worry about being caught on a pull down, because even the cops that wasn't stealing wasn't going to blow the whistle on them, because that way they would be a rat. Now, yet I have watched these ceremonies, and everybody hold their hand up, right? And they take an oath to do what, y'all? Uphold the law without fair favor. Is that the law that they take, the oath that cops take? Might vary a word one way to all. That's right? Uphold the law without fair favor. So now, if you're a policeman, and you ain't stealing nothing, but you see me stealing something, am I violating the law? What is your job as a policeman? To arrest me, uphold the law. So to tell me that you is an honest cop because you ain't stealing, but you're not going to enforce the law except to somebody else who ain't a cop. Does that make sense to y'all? And every day they would emphasize that 2 or 3 times. I got them off a letter. I said, well, who the hell are these honest cops? So when you look at this and you see the way that people can easily demonize you, this also is a spin-off of Christianity. Let me give you an example from the devil. Watch the demonizing process. Chapter 1, the question of evil. The essence of evil is abuse of a sentient being, a being that can feel pain. It is the pain that matters. Evil is grasped by the mind immediately and immediately felt by the emotions. It is sensed as hurt, deliberately inflicted. The existence of evil requires no further proof. I am, therefore I suffer evil. Is that neat? Now, nobody black wrote this book. This one, right? Evil is frequently and in many societies felt as a purposeful force and is perceived as personified. In other words, they personify it. For the sake of simplicity and clarity, I have called this personification the devil. Evil is never abstract. It must always be understood in terms of the suffering of an individual. No better description of the immediacy of evil exists than Ivan's discourse to Alyosha in the Brothers Karamazov. Now watch what he says. Imagine a trembling mother with her baby in her arms. A circle of invading Turks around her. In that sentence, he has just done what to the Turks? Just demonized them. And fair. They had planned a diversion. They pet the baby. Laugh to make it laugh. They succeed. The baby laughs. At that moment, a Turk points a pistol 4 inches from the baby's face. The baby laughs with glee, holds out his little hands to the pistol as he pulls the trigger in the baby's face and blows out his brains. artistic, wasn't it? I think that if the devil doesn't exist, but man has created him, he has created him in his own image and likeness. Now, note very quickly what the dude, and that's Mr. Yvonne, has, in one sentence, personified Turks as what? Devils, demons. But it wasn't a trait that personified this, was it? Yvonne ain't a Turk, he's Russian. So but who was it that imagined the devil? The Turk is the devil. Yvonne, not the Turk. But what he has done, you see, he has transmitted his concept of evil devil on another convenient being. And this is one of the roles that we have played in this society. The concept of God versus devil, or something similar, is a very strong one in Christian concept. That then, the Calvinist point, is what again allowed us to be enslaved without bothering the conscience of the enslavers. Am I making myself clear? Specifically, the African is a savage, and that is another form of demon. He is by nature inferior. Why is he inferior? God made him inferior. Therefore, as a Christian who fears God and who loves God, and I have a duty as a Christian to uplift my fellow man. Now you see Reverend Bacon's sermon again, another variation. I uplift my fellow man by helping him in any way I can. Can I take this African and bring him up to this level of where I am, or where I perceive myself? Can I do that? No. I have already redefined him out of that level. He is by nature inferior. He is by nature a savage, and then by extension a cannibal. By all that is holy, he is inferior. Is he inferior because I said so? No. He's inferior because that's the way the Great Spirit ordained it. If I treat him as an equal, I can no longer be a good Christian, because what I'm doing now is violating the will of God. Now you can take that position and twist it any way that you want to. You find that the oppressors have no problem in arguing both sides of the coin at the same time, or arguing one side today and the next side tomorrow. Let me give you an example. If you will study your history just prior, during up until the agitation for emancipation and end of slavery in this country, the standard wisdom of the slave master was, as I just said, these people do not have the ability to function on their own. They are by nature weak and don't have the intellect. Therefore, they need us to help them. We must take care of them, do the best we can for them, because God did not make them up to us. I'm arguing positions now. This ain't theory. Therefore, even if we wanted to free them, it would be a great injustice to them, because they're not capable of functioning out here and making it in this competitive world out here. This is a capitalistic society, and they would die out. And our Christian duty would not permit that of us, because we would not be doing, as the Reverend Bacon said, God's will. Therefore, what does our Christian duty demand of us? That we must keep them as slaves and do the best that we can for them, because they are so gentle and docile they couldn't make it in this world. Interestingly enough, and you can follow the period, look at the period of the rationale from 1800 to 1865. That was the standard excuse for slavery, the standard excuse for holding our ancestors in bondage. Out of love for us, because we couldn't possibly survive without the love and tender mercy, as Reverend Bacon said, of our masters and mistresses. And then come that period, see, I come full circle now when I said, here comes January 1, 1865. Slavery is over now. Right? You are now, you would think that, oh God, you're going to go under now. Because you're docile, right? You can't make it, you can't think. No way. The same people who just got through saying how weak and docile and unthreatening we are said, we got to put cages around these niggas. They're animals, they're savages, they're rapists, and they can't be trusted, they're sneaky. Now y'all follow my point? This is overnight. December 31st, 1864, we are meek-minded, couldn't even find our way from here to the door. Because we're in bondage. But January 1st, 1865, you're free now, or you're not. Now you, oh hell, you're a problem now. So immediately, you immediately, the finger snaps. You're no longer, that's correct. You're a criminal and a savage one. And you are a rapist by nature. You are now a monkey and an ape and all of these other things. So the whole mentality now does what? It changes. That now reaches a new justification. Okay, since these people are savages and cannibals and rapists, and this is stated, I'm not making this up, it's not paraphrasing, it was said, we cannot allow them to live among us with the same rights and privileges and responsibilities the rest of us have, because they are not capable of living as civilized white human beings. Therefore, we need what? Special laws to contain them. And up they came up with something called the Black Codes, Jim Crow laws, etc., etc. And every time you've come to a point where you overcome this obstacle, their tradition comes up with another meaning. When we look at this whole thing about affirmative action, the whole thing about, affirmative action, y'all are using affirmative action to get over. Now, affirmative action might get you a job. Let's say somebody, you got affirmative action to get a job. Can it guarantee you doing the job? If I give you option to become a lecturer, say, okay, you got that. Does that mean you're a lecturer? So if you keep coming in here and you can't do the job, how many people are going to come in here? Huh? But see, that's the other game. And it all comes out of this, quote, Christian ethos. Whatever is done, it is always justified under the morality of God ordained it. Or as the French says, le Dieu le veut. God wants it. God wills. Now once you say God wants it, and this can be used to justify all kinds of things, the same mentality. 3 weeks ago, I believe it was, don't hold me and say, you said 3 weeks, it was 3 weeks and 2 days. 2 weeks and 14 days or 13 days. The United States forces in Somalia, and I've touched on this in another lecture before when I told you before they didn't go there to feed nobody. This country ain't never. You want to feed some hungry people, you don't have to go out of this country. Go right there to Newark or downtown feed. But what they do best is kill. And that's what they went there. Wherever they go, that's what they go to do, is kill. And you got to be deaf, dumb, stupid to realize that. And what happened, there were some women and children who were protesting against these tanks. Yes, tanks. And a helicopter gunship came and, according to the New York Times, killed over 100 women and children, no people. And a spokesman for the United States Army said, and these words, quote, well, we were justified in doing this because if they would have got their hands on us, they would have torn our troops apart limb from limb. And I think clearly what the man is saying. You are there in tanks, right? You got these powerful gunships above these 50 caliber what you got. And if I'm going to have to tear you apart limb from limb, how am I attack? What am I using to attack you with? What am I using? If I tear you apart limb from limb, I ain't shooting you. Say that again? I must be using my hands. So how the hell do you justify using tanks and gunships to slaughter over 100 people who you claim will kill you, pull you apart limb from limb, if they get their hands on you. Where the hell is the damn contest? And it's all Adid's fault. The ubiquitous Adid, another instant demon. Right? All of a sudden, and they don't even have to, them people got their stuff together so well that they don't have to sit down and say how they're going to refer to anybody. Once one newspaper says, call him a warlord, everybody else falls in line. He becomes a warlord. And because I'm simple and come out of the country and I ain't too bright, I asked this question, I look at this and said, well now, if Adid is a warlord, he ain't got no gunships, he ain't got no helicopters, he ain't got no sophisticated surface-to-air missiles. What the hell does that make Clinton? Yes, ma'am. Where is he? In his own country. Did anybody invite these people there? No. So if he's a warlord, with that little bit of stuff he got, what the hell do we call Clinton? With enough firepower to burn the damn world down 10 times. But Adid is the warlord, and Clinton is the good guy. So you see, Clinton, when he was told about what had happened, he was told about this on a Sunday as he was coming out of church. And he was recording and said, I'm very sorry this happened. When I get home, I'm going to say a prayer for the ones that are dead. Now, we don't know whether he did it or not, but he invoked the deity. Now, I'm going to say a prayer for them when I get home. But we can't leave, because if we leave now, the world would perceive America as being weak. I didn't know it was about weakness. You're supposed to be going there feeding hungry people. Now, you done kill 100 times more people than you could ever feed. I ain't seen no food go there yet. But none of us wants to sit and look where Somalia is. It sits there on the horn right by the tip of Africa. And it controls the Arabian Sea and all that, and that's the issue. This is the 4th time they've been there, but they don't tell you that in the damn history books either. Check it out. Do your own homework. Or at least some of it. Now, the other irony is, Adid them don't produce one weapon or one bullet. Everybody's weapons are all made in the same place. The guns that Adid is shooting comes from here. The guns that all of them are shooting come from here. The so-called UN peacekeepers troop guns come from here. But they talk about crime in the streets. And all of these young, crazy black males that's running through these streets with these guns shooting like crazy. And I don't know one crazy black male that makes one gun. I don't know one black firm that manufactures one bullet. I don't know one black firm that makes the casing for a shotgun shell. All of these things are made by who? White folks. As a matter of fact, the president's wife the other day, and I love the logic of these folks, she has put forth a suggestion to get money for the health plan by taxing the guns that are out on the streets. That's her word, taxing the guns. You know, when you go buy a gun. So therefore, if you pay the tax, it all comes down to money, y'all. Pay the tax, no problem, and you get the gun. But nobody pays the tax. The tax is paying is that 85 cents out of every one of your tax dollars goes for guns and weapons. Now, according to these people, the evil empire is gone. And I love the way they say, oh, communism is dead. It's interesting, the racism of these people and the mentality. As far as they're concerned, when there ain't no white communist country around, it doesn't exist anymore. Which is the largest country on the earth? China. Is China the largest country on the earth? Yeah, what kind of government does China have? Is it a communist government? So how the hell is it dead? But you see the mentality? China doesn't count. They've been designated as a demon, non-people. Yeah, now, democracy has come to the former Soviet Union, right? Then how come that they are supporting Boris Yeltsin who is saying, if you don't give up the Parliament building, I'm going to ice your butts. And the people that's in the Parliament supposed to represent the democratic lawmakers of the country. But this country is not supporting the democratic people in Parliament. They're supporting the strongman Yeltsin. And the problem is that them folks didn't know how good they had it under communism.
That's right.
Economically. What'd you say?
Now they got the freedom to sleep on the street.
Thank you, ma'am. You said it, I didn't. Now they got the freedom to sleep on the street. Nobody is guaranteed an apartment anymore. You have the freedom now to compete for a job if you can find one. All right? And Mr. Yeltsin says, we want some of that good capitalism. And I say to him, come and walk down the streets of any black community in the United States and ask them how well they have fared under this wonderful institution of capitalism. Even with enslaving us, with putting all kinds of stumbling blocks in our way, with Jim Crowing us, with black coding us, with taking jobs away from us, with stealing from us, and they still can't provide enough jobs for most of their own people. And yet, Mr. and Mrs. Clinton go to church every Sunday. They're good Christians. Billy Graham was a great Christian. Couldn't find it in his heart to condemn the thief Richard Nixon, but he dropped him like a hot potato once it became obvious that he wasn't going to be president no more. I told him, but he didn't listen to me. Bye, y'all. When we look at the role, the lies, the hypocrisy, and the chicanery that have been done not only to African people, to the world, in the name of Christianity, and is still being practiced today. Still being practiced today. I looked at Brother Nelson Mandela. As you all know, I've made no bones about it. I support the Pan-African Congress. Always not just related to this, because I don't understand any African of us who could be kicked in the posterity for 27 years, cut off from family, from country or house, and stand up there and say, lift the sanctions. No wonder Winnie Mandela got in the wind. I like to, if I'm charitable, I would like to say, well, maybe, as my grandma said, maybe you got a little touched in the head or something. Yeah. You're going to lift the embargo. The folks that kicked us in Azania for over 500 years, the Calvinists, or they call the Dutch Reformed Church, or the Congregationalists as we refer to them here, all did it in the name of God. God made them superior, and our job was to be servants. You take my house, my wife, my land, and this has been the pattern, not just for us as African people. We have to remember this all over. It was the pattern and the rationale in Asia. It was the pattern and rationale for many of you people here who I know have indigenous people's blood in your veins. I can tell by looking at you. And these same people are saying, I ain't done nothing to you. God, there we go again. God gave us this land. Well, according to them, that God only put the indigenous people here as caretakers to take care of the land. That's how they explain the fact. When you say, well, how do you explain the fact that these indigenous people were here before you came? No problem. God sent them here as caretakers to take care of our land until we came to take charge. And then when we came to take charge and we say, okay, it's all over, give me our land, they refused to do it, so we had no choice but to kill them. And then put the rest of them in concentration camps. We're talking about a people, and Mr. Mandela must know this. I've mentioned it in lectures here before, but I repeat it because it deserves repeating, because it's part of one of those traumatic parts of our history that is very little spoken of or known about. The Germans, wonderful Christians, went to Herero land in the mid-80s, in mid-1880s, on a civilizing mission. People like Dr. Carl Peters went in because these savages and these cannibals needed the Christianizing thing. Within 10 years, the Hereros, of course, were cattle breeding people. Within 10 years, they had taken all the Herero cattle, virtually all the cattle. The Herero people were reduced from its nearest count, about 1.5 million to less than 100,000, deliberately by starvation and killing, to the extent that the Herero women stopped getting pregnant, refused to have babies. I think Adolf Hitler may have been at most 3 or 4 years old then. Nobody mentioned the Holocaust, except for people like George Washington Williams and a few other African Americans, and Sir Roger Casement of Britain. The world didn't pay any attention to what was happening to the Hereros at the same time that King Leopold of the Belgians, and this is of course a much more widely known case, obviously because Belgium is a much larger, Zaire is a much larger country, but we know that Leopold of the Belgians routinely had a hand or a foot cut off when you didn't come up with your quota of rubber for the day. And all this was done, as they referred to King Leopold, who of course, by the way, was one of Queen Victoria's grandsons. As so was the Kaiser, which was another one, in case y'all get these relationships, these kinships wrong up. He was known, always addressed as His Catholic Majesty. So, you take it from there. When people tried to bring William McKinley and other people here, no problem. Nobody's dying. Secret judgments of God. Old world disease in colonial Spanish America. Tying in now the Inquisition and the demonizing of people. The Spaniards, as you know, within, and these are rough figures, within 30 years after the coming of the Spaniards with the indigenous people in these areas, and we know this from people such as Bartolomé de las Casas, the Abbey, and others who wrote contemporary, something like around, according to these people, over 70% of all the indigenous people in all those areas where the Spaniards had come, Peru, Mexico, etc., had died. And they had died from what? European diseases, which they had no immunity for. And the Spaniards, of course, being good Christian people, said this. In the wake of European expansion, disease outbreaks in the New World caused the greatest loss of life known to history. During the first century after contact, perhaps 90% of native inhabitants succumbed to diseases such as smallpox, measles, plague, and influenza, against which they had no immunities. This rare collection of case studies by historians, geographers, and anthropologists is an extraordinary contribution to Latin American colonial history, the history of medicine and American Indian studies. These essays describe a web of disease that spread along routes of access and penetration, diffusing through time and across space, according to key variables that included genetics, ecology, and the ages of potential victims, as well as social and cultural factors affecting exposure. Before the discovery of germ theory, New World epidemics was called a secret judgment of God. Do you understand what they're saying? These people were dying because God, for not being Christians, God did it to them. It was a secret judgment. Now the one disease that not only did them in, but also did us in, of course, or two, one was the bubonic plague, which they call the Black Death. But the one that still ravages us today, of course, is a venereal disease, predominantly syphilis. And syphilis was the thing that, as a matter of fact, Columbus, we know, that's been documented, died from paresis as a result of syphilis. And this was the one disease that was the most devastating of all among Asians, among Africans and indigenous people here, because there was no defense against it. And they said that was the cause of the Spanish conquest at the cost of disastrous native depopulation. And they go on and give, in this book, they give you many, many examples, which is all documented. As far as the cannibalistic theory, I bought a couple of these records. This is something I got from you, Newgate Calendar. The blood-soaked pages of the most infamous chronicles of crime. You got to look at the background of these people to see. It's ironic because as a historian and a researcher, I keep hearing about us cannibals and this and that and the other, but the only documentation that I have been able to discover under cannibalism so far all involve, guess who? Europeans. And here's an example of the 16th century of a man by the name of Sawney Bean. B-E-A-N, S-A-W-N-E-Y. And this is the kind of history that they don't like you all to get to know. Because remember now, we're talking the 17th century. They weren't too familiar with us then. And what it says basically, that Sawney and his wife and his children, I'll just read you a little bit of this. I hope you got strong stomachs. The following narrative presents such a picture of human barbarity that were it not attested by the most unquestionable historical evidence, it would be that the king was very graceful, gracious, and merciful, and would cause none to be executed, but such as had been officers or capital offenders. Close quote. In exchange for an account of where and in what capacity they had served in the Duke's army, the prisoners would, quote, render ourselves fit objects of the king's grace and favor. Meaning, I'm going to let y'all go. Stand on your eyebrow, if you believe that. By confessing to membership in the Duke's forces, the prisoners expected to be treated as conquered soldiers, but the Lord Chief Justice insisted that they must now plead guilty to treason, and that if we would acknowledge our crime by pleading guilty to our indictment, the king, who was almost all mercy, would be as ready to forgive us as we were ready to rebel against him. As encouragement to accept the king's mercy, the Lord Chief Justice quickly tried and convicted 28 of those who had pleaded not guilty and signed a warrant for their execution the same afternoon. Prompted by the sudden dispatch of these men, the remaining prisoners, all but 3 or 4, quickly pleaded guilty in hope of saving their lives. They were rewarded by the gracious and merciful James II by being condemned to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. Whoop, shoo, shoo. Good gracious mercy of the king. Y'all keep believing in them folk word. Clinton is your friend. 230 were so executed. The remainder, Pittman and his brother among them, were ordered, transported to be sold into slavery in what they call the Caribbean Islands, what we now call the Caribbean. Now you note this, that they're not sending him to prison there. They are selling his English behind into slavery.
Another part of the history they just oversight left out of American history. Sold, along with nearly 100 more prisoners, to George Penn, a needy papist, that is a Catholic. Pittman and his brother were informed that if their family could redeem them by paying the price of transportation, the sons would be freed at Barbados. They owned the ship now. The money was paid, and Pittman and his brother transported, taking ship at London bound for Barbados, where we arrived in about 5 weeks' time, but had a very sickly passage, insomuch that 9 of my companions were buried at sea. Anticipating freedom, Pittman and his brother instead found themselves welcomed in Barbados by the governor and the General Assembly with the following official decree, and I quote, "Whereas a most horrid, wicked, and execrable rebellion was lately raised and prosecuted within His Majesty's dominions by James Scott, late Duke of Monmouth, for which impious act many of them have since been deservedly punished with the crime of death according to law, and for as much as His Sacred Majesty," I love that, Sacred Majesty has signified it as His royal pleasure that the said rebels, or so many of them as should be transported to His said American colonies, should be there obliged and held to serve the buyers of them. Is that clear? For and during the space of at least 10 years or the pleasure, and that they not be permitted in any manner whatsoever to redeem themselves by money or otherwise until at least 10 years has been transpired. Thus we may see, the distraught enraged says Pittman, the buying and selling of free men into slavery. Now these ain't my word, y'all. These are Dr. Henry Pittman, a Caucasian man, an Englishman. And what's the term he used? Buying and selling of free men into slavery. Any person assisting one of the rebels to escape would be fined 500 pounds, while any servant or rebel attempting to escape the island before the completion of his 10-year term was to be given 39 lashes, quote-unquote, on his bare body. And, quote, on another market day in the same town, he be set in the pillory by the space of 1 hour and be burned in the forehead with the letters FT, signifying fugitive traitor. Of course, all of that was in your Caribbean and American history books, right? The boundlessness of King James' mercy extended to the owner or keeper of any, quote, small vessel, sloop, shallow, wherry, fishing boat, or any other sort of boat belonging to this island, each of whom was now required to post a bond of 200 pounds against the use of his vessel for escape by, quote, any servant, slave, or debtor. And if any woman on the island might marry any of the said convict slaves for the purpose of freeing him from his slavery, the rebel would be ordered to serve the remainder of his time for some other person, and the woman required to forfeit 200 pounds and be lashed 30 lashes on her back and serve 6 months in prison. I remind you once again, these are Caucasian women they talk about, not Mosella. Tricked into confessing guilt for treason, his promise of freedom in Barbados betrayed, facing 10 years slavery on an island where 4/5 of the servants didn't survive the first year. Pittman sustained himself with the hope of a pardon, yet it was his loss of professional standing that finally drove him beyond endurance. Denied adequate food or clothing as well as compensation of any sort for his services as a surgeon, Pittman finally told his harsh master, quote, that I would no longer serve him or anybody else as a surgeon unless I was entertained according to the just merits of my profession and practice. You see? See how white folks are? Now where's this dude? And what's his condition? Slave. What is his mentality to tell him? They whip his butt, they put him out, they starve him, he's standing up telling his master what? I ain't gonna serve you, man. I want my station in my profession. So I would master myself, say, okay, you Dr. Slave, instead of Mr. Slave. Yeah, right. For his trouble, Pittman was beaten with a cane upon his head, arms and back by his angry master. like a furious fencer until my skin broke. And then he was confined to close quarters in the stock in the heat of the hot sun for 12 hours. Finally, he talks about they finally made good their escape. They went to Tortuga with the whole Howard thing. Now, you know, when they made them movies with Errol Flynn, well, most of y'all too young to remember Errol Flynn, Captain Blood and all them things, and them C.S. Forrester, Captain Horatio things. Now, why wouldn't they? Now, this got all the elements, man. Why did Hollywood take that for a script? Huh? No, because that would be too much like truth. But eventually, it took this man 10 years. But he and how he finally got away? He had to go get 3 black folks on the island who went with them, and luckily they were caught out by some pirates, and eventually he made his way to New York, and he said nowhere in hell would he didn't even want to hear the name England again. When we look at this, anywhere we look, and we see, not just with us, in summation, these people use the Bible and Christianity as a rationale for enslaving people, exploiting people, including their own people. And one of the things that I find amazing is how so many of our people will to this day find so much among these people to admire. When people will not only lie to you, they lie to everybody else they come in contact with. And yet there's this need to want to believe. I have no problem with Christianity. But you cannot take a religion which in essence is supposed to be compassionate and turn it into something else and then ask me for my loyalty to it. We've covered in these 3 sessions, and you know, as I say, no matter how long we go, we can only scratch the surface. I've done as much as I could to bring you as broad a scope of the subject with the time allotted to me. For finale, Brother Yusuf has another example from the modern version. In other words, what I want to show you is the continuum. Is that clear? In other words, we tend to think, encourage that, well, that was then and this is now. No, that was then and this is then. So what we will wind up with is, I don't know how long is this piece, Brother Peter?
30 minutes.
Huh? 30 minutes. And I think this is from, and you can take it on, I don't want to upstage you. Again, remember what I just read in the cross section, and hopefully you can, are you ready, sir? We, myself and Brother Pitzer and others, we feel that whenever we come upon information and things like this, we have an obligation to bring it before you, because your chances of getting this kind of stuff in the media is improved. Do you think it's worthwhile to see these things here? The other point in transformation, as I said, about what goes around comes around. Only a few years ago, this kind of thing normally happened only to people like those in this room. But once you get away with something, you see, this is something that all philosophers or all wise people have said from the beginning. Nothing succeeds like success. When you get away with it with one group, even though the group says, oh, it's got nothing to do with me, you're only laying down the ground where the next day or the next week it will be somebody else. Now, I've been doing lectures on, so I'm having access to them, and I said to people and groups particularly, like, this thing does not play the way they said. And how do you know this? I know it not because I'm brilliant, but because I'm an African. And I'm old enough to remember They've done this thing. Let's look at how it was up. The Scottsboro boys, our time. 9 men framed and sentenced to the chair. In your time, the New York Six, the Panthers, the young man in Chicago, Fred Hampton, Bobby Seale, the New York Eight, the so-called Statue of Liberty caper. And all of these cases, it was always a question of setting up somebody. And once you get away with it, they get careless. Their arrogance is something that they assume. And of course, now that it hits white people, they're looking and saying, my God, how could this happen to us? But those of us in this room know it has been our cross for over 500 years. That now, it has now become what the people used to say, the niggerization, if you will, of America. If you get in the way of these people, they will crunch you down. Something else I hope you paid strict attention to, aside from dramatic evidence. Watch the high-tech sophistication. Y'all notice that? They have heat sinks where they can get a fix on anybody in the house, where you are, what you're saying. The assumption is always that if I get all this high-tech, I can do whatever I want and get away with it. But never underestimate people power. Technology cannot replace people. It is important. But where there's a will, because the same technology that served them allowed you to be able to see this tonight. But I think we miss the thing if we as African people do not understand and seriously look at the nature of the society in which we live and the world in which we live. In summation, I constantly say this, and there are new people here, so I'll remind you this. You are dealing with a people who only make up 6% of the human beings on God's earth. You understand what I'm saying to you? 94% of all human beings on this earth are not European. Now, let me put it to you. You have had it for 500 years. You have beat up, you have abused, you have robbed, you have murdered, you have raped, you have pillaged the whole world. And now you are losing. And y'all understand me clearly? You're losing your grip. What is the state of their minds? Huh?
Crazy.
What? Who said that? That's correct. Crazy and fear. There's always the assumption that what I have done to you, you will return to me, which means they don't trust people. But y'all follow me exactly what I'm saying. Therefore, they feel that since we have the numbers, they will try to use the technology. But that hasn't worked yet, because people are still the most important thing on this earth. But in order to get your day in the sun, you can't be intellectually lazy. You can't be haphazard parents or brothers or sisters or guardians. It's hard work. I'm often asked, hey, Professor, you know, you're still going at 73. Hell, let me tell you something. I would like nothing better than to go sit on the bank down home in Georgia and fish for trout or something, you know? I really would. I didn't plan to be up here this hour. I'm still teaching out there trying to do it. But you can't sit down and not do anything when there's so much that's needed. Our youth are in dire trouble. Our communities are screaming. We have no right to sit on our apathy and say that it has nothing to do with us. In my opinion, the most important needed thing among us is an intellectual curiosity, a willingness to read and to learn and to stop being so arrogant and having this thing that we don't want nobody who looks like us to teach us nothing. It's a rough world out there, but it ain't gonna roll over and play dead for us. these folks have had power for so long, they think it belongs to them. And if you don't believe me, just watch these folks how they predict the weather. Huh? Okay? You think I'm crazy? Watch how they predict the weather. I'm giving you the next 2-week forecast. You're going to have 3% there. Listen, in the morning you'll get there, this and that. And they put that out there like it is coming down from on high. And then stand up there and utter shock when the rain don't come. Right? Yes, they jumped up the other day about, why did this earthquake come where it did? This is the mentality, what I'm telling you. We have got to come up with something to you. When a grown person will sit up there and going to question why an earthquake happened there, it's like you got to control them, like King Canute said, I don't want the tide. I don't want that to be true. It's got to be, we've got brains, we've got to use them. I thank you, people, and you have questions if you do, because I've been coming here now, I guess, 5 or 6 years, and each time I come, there are more and more people here. I think that more and more our people are getting the message. And the bottom line is, if the job gets done, Moses and Moselle are going to have to do it. The system ain't going to roll over and play dead for us. Most of them people in there look like them. The people I read you about, Mr. Pittman, them, look like them. This was long before they knew anything about us. Hopefully, it should tell you something. Hopefully, this has been of some value to you in summation. If you have any questions, I will certainly give a few minutes and entertain them. If not, again, thank you for coming, and again, thanks to our host. Yes, sir.
Can you come up?
Thank you very much, sir. One question I had that came to my mind. In the film came on where the camera focused on this brother, this black man, and it was a Harvard educated.
Yes, right.
And also, bothered my mind, how could a brother that status or so-called education and training to follow some crack, you know what I mean?
Please, for y'all, the man has a question. Please give him the courtesy of letting me. Thank you. How could he fall for?
Yeah. This little cracker, you know what I mean? It didn't have no letters at all,
The answer is very simple.
It doesn't even look worthy by their standards.
Let me say this, brother. The question, how could a black man or any man with a Harvard degree fall for whatever it is? Well, the fallacy there is assuming that a Harvard degree has any more validity than any other kind of degree. Some of the dullest people in the world come out from Harvard. Harvard, let me just give you an example, because it's an important question. We need to get this to our children. Joseph Kennedy, John Kennedy's father, all of them were devout Catholics. Come back to religion again. He wanted to move out and become a big wheel in the large WASP world, the Protestant world. His family wanted him to go to to Boston College, which was a Catholic institution. And his grandfather, Honey Fitz, says, no, I want you to go to Harvard. Because, he said, why? Because Harvard is the place where the people that run the system go to make the connections to meet. You follow what I'm saying? And he says to the mentor, I can't, man, this is the creme de la creme. And here was the answer. Don't believe any of that bullshit. He says, all you've got to do, because you think you're smart, go there and get your gentleman's seat. Nobody's going to ask you, when they see on your wall that you graduated from, nobody's going to ask you whether you had a C average or D average or an A average. The important thing they respond to is that piece of paper that says Harvard. In other words, you don't get, in terms of education, you don't get any better education in Harvard than you get from any other place. What it will give you is the contact to the folks, the WASP, that run the system. Now, it will give that to you if you're white. Other side of the coin, William Monroe Trotter, who graduated from Harvard right after Du Bois, walked away magna cum laude. And Trotter, fair-skinned, Caucasian-looking, brilliant, knew that he had it made. And when he came out, he went around all of those brokers' houses and those banks in Boston looking for a position. Guys who his friends who had taken him home on weekends while they were undergraduate. None of them had a job for him. None of them. And he said, I watched guys, in his autobiography, he says, I watched guys that I tutored, helped to get by, turning me down for a job. And at that point he said, the hell with white people. That's how William Monroe Trotter got the rest of his life to become the militant that he was. Du Bois had to go through this same kind of thing. And that's a part of the mystique, I think. The assumption is, because it has a name, it is again, Harvard, and most people don't realize this, Harvard was founded in 1836 as the bastion of New England Puritanism. Yale was founded as a bastion of New England Unitarianism. So both of these institutions came out of hierarchies of not only of monetary, but the hierarchy of the top echelon of the Episcopalian Protestant church establishment. So why this could happen? You know, it happens to anybody if we buy the system. If we don't look at, analyze what is there, and a lot of times, the way that this is sold to us, it's very difficult sometimes I've had people say to me, oh, well, you're just knocking this, like when I lecture young people about, I believe, and being natural, whatever you have up there, God didn't make a mistake. You have curly hair, that's what distinguishes us. So you wear that. And they look at me and say, oh, you just saying that because you ain't got no hair. You see? So you can rationalize anything if you want to rationalize it. It doesn't, of course, make it right. And unless we can come and show what we need to look at, and maybe we need to do the next series on what the hell constitutes meaningful education. I believe that our people really need to understand that. Do we want an education that is going to be seriously for liberation and raising the conscience, or are we talking about something that will just give a few of us an edge over our brother? Didn't help this brother. He ended up dead.
I read a speech by Marcus Garvey. I recall reading a speech by Marcus Garvey several years ago, when Marcus Garvey was saying that some of our biggest traitors, in contrast to other people, come from that class.
Well,
I remember some of our most misguided people. This brother was like a classic example.
Well, that's natural. That is natural because, as a matter of fact, if any of you saw Brother Gill today, he had David Du Bois' son, and they own it. And this is an inevitable part, because Du Bois had to learn the hard way this business about the talented tenth. When he got in trouble, the talented tenth became conspicuous by hiding as far as they could from him. And sometimes, as hard as it is, and listen, I'm not going to romanticize grassroots people, because romanticization will get us in trouble. Some of the damnedest, meanest people you will run into so-called street smart people. Oh yes. And everybody in this room knows that when you say it. But that's not, the point is, you can't have a movement without your mass of people. If they have problems, you have to work to deal with the problem. Even if you wanted to build it around elitism, you can't do that pragmatically because there ain't enough of them. And that if even assuming that all of them had a commitment and the growth, and that includes me and all of it, there's a process in this society that you must find someplace a way to come to terms with the reality. Nobody that I know, no African in this society is clean. Getting clean is a lifetime job. I have bad habits of conditioning by these people because we get conditioned without even knowing we get conditioned. You can't afford. Let me give you an example. Most of you now see, have y'all noticed, and I alluded to this earlier, have y'all noticed that the majority of these negative ads I call on TV always use African people as friends? For example, when they're doing ads for drug addiction, And I was just there, the Maldives, and I was terrified that it's either somebody that looks like you, or an African female or male, or it's somebody Hispanic. Or if it's, the cockroach syndrome. You realize that if you looked at advertisements for these combat zone stuff, white folks don't have cockroaches. All right? Right? You got Muhammad Ali, saying, and I'm going to cut it right now, but it says, Muhammad Ali saying, I don't want you to have roaches. And this is saying, roaches in my house. Now, and yet, when you look at the reality, ask any of these sisters out here who work in European folks' kitchens, and they'll tell you where the roaches are. Right? They keep, whenever they show something about AIDS or HIV positive, they always got some black man, woman, or child. And yet, every time I read the New York Times obituary page, who the hell do I see dying from AIDS? White folks. So we have to, that thing gets bombarded at us constantly. So it is a full-time job. And when we allow the TV to babysit our children, or the other thing, I go into homes. And let me just give you this last thing, look what I'm saying. We think we are out of the woods, or some of us. And you hear these people talking about practice. Here's a book that The Day America Told the Truth. Very interesting book. You ain't gonna find it in your bookstore anywhere, but it tells you clearly, and you ain't gonna find it nowhere where it's, let me see, but I want to just give this to you, to try to at least give you an idea of what there's always something that y'all hide from me. Please give me. I say semantics, of course. Now, listen to this. Whites, they say this. It seems so very long ago, but white Americans today hold blacks and blacks alone to blame for their current position in American society. We did it to ourselves. All right? The denial. They got nothing to do, and it goes on to say, listen at this, quote, we tried to help. Whites say over and over, but blacks wouldn't help themselves. This is mentality. Now that means, and when you say we started helping in the 60s, you see, all of us came here in 1959, and we got off the boat free, and we came here to become a problem. But what these people did, they say, hey, we went in and we talked to these people. And they said, hey, this is what I think. Listen to the statistics here. They think that 49% of all white folks think that we're racist. Right? Y'all invented racism. You didn't know that. Right? Here. 33% of them believe that we are inherently criminal. That's now. 32% say we are naturally poor. 80% say we are naturally lazy and we do not wish to help ourselves. Now, I don't care about these attitudes except for one point. If the majority of these folks have this kind of mentality, where the hell is their ground for this optimism about us coming to some kind, right, of accommodation of it? This means clearly the only solution that we have is to get it together and do for self. That may be harder, but these folks, and I say, I don't know nothing about slavery. Had nothing to do with me. That's what they say. I had nothing to do with that. It's your fault. Now let me ask you, just theoretically, are these kind of people with this mindset, are they really going to be willing to do anything about making any kind of sacrifices to help us out of the problem? When you say that I get my job through affirmative action, and I say to you, well, affirmative action teach me how to drive an automobile, the answer obviously is no. Will affirmative action make me an air control expert? No. So while affirmative action might get you access to a job, you have to have the ability to keep the job. So when you're hiding behind affirmative action, what you're really saying is, I don't want to give up none of my privileges. And this is what it's all about, y'all. Privileges and power. And if you ain't got none, then the name of the game is to try to get some, and you don't get it by dissipating what little you have before you get in the position. Okay? Thank y'all. I'm tired. What? Who said that?
Come on. The only reason why I'm doing this is this is his brother's first time ever seen him here. Okay. But it's his first time asking.
Okay. I don't like to leave people in. I don't.
We're not leaving nobody hanging.
Yeah.
In fact, wait a minute. We got two questions. That's all right.
I will not leave anybody hanging. Try to keep them short because the people might want to hear. They want to get home. Yes, sir.
I understand.
All right. Yes, sir.
Okay. I had a question about what you mentioned earlier about the Ten Commandments.
Yes.
And there being maybe like a derivative from...
No, not maybe. They are. Yeah. I didn't say maybe.
Okay.
Yes. The Code of Hammurabi.
Right.
Hammurabi, who was the ruler of Babylon between 10 and 15,000 years prior to the Hebrews' Babylonian captivity, which of course when they came out of that, they brought back the nucleus of what later became the Hebrew culture and religion.
Okay, now what about the negative confessions of Naha?
Yes, well, yes, they are all, those things, remember we're talking about a culture that stemmed from the same area. Now, I can't say to you, I never said, well, Hammurabi invented it. All I'm saying is that the concept came long before. When you start to say the Ten Commandments going back to Hebrewism, that is a misnomer. We know that Naha has this. As a matter of fact, maybe I should just go a step further and say, every culture has at least some of these rules, the statement. They may not state them in this form, because these are universal truths. You can't have a society that allows everybody in it to go around picking on everybody else. You can't have a society, or there's a coherent society. So ultimately, people are not stupid. Once you become a social being, you've got to have rules. The basic social grouping is the family. And in the beginning, you have a father, mother, children, etc., and there are specific rules of how everybody must do. As the clan broadens, uncles, aunts, and other people and outside people come in. But the clan or the group or the tribe, if you will, cannot function cohesively unless there are certain general rules that everybody understood, must be followed, and if you break them, that is where the concept of every culture has something called a taboo. A no-no that nobody breaks without, your authority. So the concept, what the Christians have done, has tried in many ways to take cultures, conditions, values that had belonged to those of people in that crescent, what they call it, one of the three, the Indus Valley, the land between the rivers, and the Egyptian, and culture, and of course Zimbabwe, and try to expropriate them to their own values. And all I'm saying is that we cannot, because once you say, as Hebrews take, that the Hebrews say that we gave the world monotheism. And I'm not even talking about color. Because we know the ancient Hebrews didn't look like David Ben-Gurion or Yitzhak Shamir. They're European. But to make that statement, you follow what I'm saying, is a statement that cannot be proven. Because you're claiming that before this, what is that main thing? I am the Lord thy God, and thou shalt have no other God before me. But we know there are examples in ancient Egypt. I don't even have to go into this. Those of us who come regularly to these lectures, Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark, who are much more knowledgeable than I, we know this. But remember, these concepts which you younger people take for granted, when I was your age, for somebody to have said to me what I just said to you, I didn't have the background that you have. It sounded like earth-shaking. Man, how could you say? That's like blasphemy. How can you say that the Ten Commandments didn't come from Judaism? This is what I tried to make you understand when I talked about the catechism. You follow what I'm saying? But you have access and enough knowledge to ask the question and be able to absorb and digest the information, and then move it on there. So that's all I meant about that in terms of the Code of Hammurabi as a kind of a conscious raising thing. And I would argue, it is my belief, I can't prove it, but it's my belief that this is one of the reasons why this country wants to wipe Iraq off the map. Because when you talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and all this, they know the role that Mesopotamia has played. They also know the role that Africans had played. We were always a part of that culture of Saudi Arabia. We know Bilal, who was the right-hand person of Muhammad, or Saudi Arabia was his home. This is where he came. So we've had this thing on. So if you start opening up that can of worms, that's why the Israelis kept the Dead Sea Scrolls off limits. And the irony of it is they didn't even find him. An Arab shepherd boy found him, and they expropriated him. Okay? You, sir? Thank you. Yes, sir.
Two-part question. It's apparent that Caucasian has been very volatile throughout the history and domination. I want to know, we are aware of a lot of problems that exist as a result of that. I want to know, what is your solution applicably? And if this education and informative, being informative, how can that combat against high technology and weaponry? If I'm trying to see the connection, if I know something and still can't do nothing, and I have high technology opposing me and weaponry, how can I find a solution?
Well, okay, very simple. In the first place, you want to? No, I don't need a chance. I'm ready. In the first place, and I understand it, and on the other side, you're making an erroneous assumption, which is the same assumption, erroneous assumption that European made. They assume that technology is going to carry the day. But again, now here's what history will teach us. I'll look at that history self. The caveman who first discovered, you assuming he's beaten like heck, and they put it on even match. And then one day, one guy, we don't know whether thought or not, picked up a rock and bam, he hit the other dude, knocked him out. At that point, technology took a great leap forward, because he realized now, all I need, I don't have to go at this with my hand anymore. Bear with me, and you see. But I've got this rock now. Bam! I can bash his head. But very quickly, the adversary says, "Okay, I can't fight him. But if I get away and I take a rock and I'm accurate, I throw it and I hit him, I don't need to get up and hit the rock." Technology is now taking another step. What we're looking at is, at every stage of history, in all of these books, when we looked at what was happening during the Reformation period, all of the assumptions was at that time, at any period, was this technology which I have is going to give me the age, and I'm going to rule the world forever. But technology, that's why I said earlier, technology can only give you, any group, an edge momentarily, because what any brain can figure out, another human brain will eventually find a way to defeat. If you don't believe me, there's a big, thick book of about 3,000 pages in any well-stocked library called The History of the Lock and Key. Go look at it, and you will see in all these 3,000 pages that they have examples of about 30,000 different locks and different keys. Every advance was the final thing advertised as the ultimate to keep somebody from breaking in and getting your goods. And eventually that key was defeated, and somebody broke in and got the goods. Now, one mind keeps looking from it, so it's a leapfrog kind of a thing. If the Europeans' control of high technology really would have given them the edge, see, I have the proof that that don't work, because if it did, you wouldn't have all these independent nations in Asia and Africa and today. These people didn't get up and say, "Hey, we're sorry kicking y'all behind." No. These people won in 1789, in the 1790s. Napoleon's France was the most powerful high-tech army in the world. They put all the other high-tech European armies to rout. Who defeated them? Huh? A bunch of former slaves in Haiti, Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and Henri Christophe. Did they have the high tech? No. They did it by what? Guerrilla warfare. The French, Napoleon finally said, you niggas won't fight fair. Come on out and fight. I should come out and let you just mow me now. You follow what I'm saying? The Haitians invented what today is known as modern guerrilla warfare. High tech can only get you to a certain point. If I surround you in this building, and you can get enough food in here to hold you up for a while, but ultimately, because you're human, and that's the bottom line, and all of these so-called ultimate weapons are based on the assumption that technology will carry the day. It might tomorrow, son, but it ain't done yet. You know, and I have to go with history. You heard Clinton's speech to the UN Monday? What did he say to these people? Now, for the last, 15, 20 years, the United States been running. I'm the baddest dude on the block. I kick everybody behind. Now, you got caught all over the world, and you now discover what any of us could have told them. You ain't big enough. You don't have enough technology. So what is he saying to the UN now? Hey, y'all, you need to back off because we can't police the whole world, and that's true. You see? Now, as far as we are concerned, the one problem that I feel we have, with all the knowledge in the world, the first thing you got to have is unity. And the way you do that, of course, is to learn to trust each other. But that means we've got to try to get rid of this legacy of slavery. You know, and this is an awesome thing. First, we have to recognize that it's there.
Yeah.
You know, when I walk through my streets in Brooklyn, and I see on every block at least 3 or 4 so-called nail parlors, and I look in them nail parlors and I see Asian people in there, and there ain't no Asian people living in the streets. And I look and I see 18 or 20 of our sisters in there lined up, waiting for somebody to take them. It just tells me something about our mentality. When I look and see men, black men who will go and disrespect, you know, I hear, you know, on the street casually referring to sisters as bitches, even the sisters have taken themselves. This tells me we have a problem. We will not protect and fight for that that we don't respect. And unless we are willing to admit we've picked up some bad habits, and we've got to first deal with ourselves from within. Begin to reach out to these young guys, you know, these kids, get on their butts. So they curse you out, they call you an MF. So what? You don't know when what you say will take advantage, because the alternative, damn it, is too horrible to contemplate. Make sense? Thank you. Have a good evening.